Welcome to Office 2010 video 36. We're studying Excel here, and we've been studying data analysis the last couple of videos. And in this video, we got to talk about the amazing pivot table feature. Now, we're on the sheet PT. We actually created this sheet in our last video, which was about sort and filter, where we copied this whole sheet over here. So we're on this sheet right here. Now, I'm going to control and zoom and roll in just a little bit. As always, before you do your data analysis features like sort, filter, pivot table, field names, column headers have to be in the first row, records have to be in rows, and no data anywhere touching the sides of the data set. Once you do this, you can do sort, filter, pivot table, and other data analysis feature. Now, normally we go to the data ribbon and we find our data analysis like filter and sort, but for whatever reason, they put the pivot table on the insert tab. Now, here's the deal. Most people, and this is like the vast majority of working humans on the planet Earth, when they hear pivot table, they start to shake. They think it's hard. It's not. Pivot tables are unbelievably easy. But here's the trick. Here's the trick to make them easy. You got to envision the end result first. Now, what we'd like to do is we'd like your boss comes in and say, hey, I need you to add up all of the sales from this column, but I want you to organize it by region and sales rep. So there's two variables, region and sales rep. And we're going to make a cross-tabulated table. Now, don't let that word scare you either. We've already seen a cross-tabulated table. Let's go back to our Charts 4 sheet. Charts 3 sheet. And there it was. We'd already seen this. We have some row headers and some column headers. And at the intersection, so kites, website sales, we had this number. That's it. That's what you do. You envision your table. So let's go back to the sheet PT. And there it is. Your boss says, I want to report in the next 3 hours. I know it's going to take you a long time to create it by region and sales rep. And please add up all the sales. And you, of course, know pivot tables, so you know it will take you less than 5 minutes. But here's the trick. You have to envision it first. The row headers are going to be our employees or our sales reps. And then across the top, we're going to have our regions. That's it. If you know that these are called row headers, this is a row of numbers, and that's the name at the front, which is called a row header. And if you know this is a column header, right? So for any intersecting value, here's Jerry's North. If you know that these are column headers, these are row headers, and these are values that we're doing some calculating on, pivot tables are easy. So let's see how to do it. Once you've envisioned that up front, totally easy. Now, just like with sort and filter, you got to click in one cell. You don't like highlight just this, because then it'll try to make a pivot table just out of that. One cell in any part of the data set. Go to pivot tables and pivot tables. Now, I'm going to do the keyboard shortcut. Again, you would use the ribbon method. But if you do pivot tables all the time, which some people do in their jobs, that's all they do all day, then the keyboard shortcut Alt, and then N for insert, and then V for pivot table, and then T. So Alt NVT. All right, and this dialog box is a one-step dialog box. In 2003 and earlier, there used to be 3 steps. But it's real easy. It just says, hey, where's your data? We've been studying how to set up data, so we know we set up our data correctly. So that should be correct. It always guesses correct if your data set is set up correctly. And then do you want it on a new sheet or an existing worksheet? I'm going to say a new worksheet. Now, before I click OK here, these are fields, right? Field names. Totally important that you know that those are field names. All right, click OK. Now, here's the picture, and it's trying to remind you. See right there, it's got some row headers, and there it's got some column headers. And then over here, it's trying to remind you of what this is. There's a field list, and it says, hey, check the fields, and it will create your pivot table automatically here. So here's your field list. 4 areas. And notice if you're already versed in column labels or column headers and row labels like we envisioned in our table, then this is easy. And it's even got a little picture there, right? That's the variable that goes at the top. This is the variable that goes on the side here. And there's our values. So guess what? All you do is you click and drag to here, and it's done automatically. Now, this picture says check, right? So you can literally check, and it drops it over there. But sometimes it doesn't go exactly where you want. And so like if we do sales rep, it's going to drop it over here and organize it like that. Forget that. The way I do it, just to make it easy on myself, I always click and drag. So I'm going to go to row. Notice right here that no symbol, but down here it says, OK, you can drop it. So I drop region there because that's what we envision, right? Row labels. Sales rep goes in the column. Hey, that's backwards. Hey, you know why they call it a pivot table? Because you can pivot it any direction you want. I'm like, oh, OK. You can actually drag it down here and drag it back over here. And that looks like the table that we envisioned. All right, and then you simply drag the sales right here down to values. Now, by default, if there are no blanks in the data set or words, by default it will come up sum. And there it is. The essence. Now we can do some formatting. We're going to learn a bunch of cool tricks. But that's it. A couple clicks. Now I'm going to right-click my sheet here. Right-click. Here's the pivot table. I'm going to right-click delete. I just want to do that in fast speed. Because usually once you do this all the time, you just come to your data set, Alt-NVT. You hit Enter. You immediately drag region to the rows. Sales rep, whoops, I did it backward. No, that's right. Sales rep there, and values, sales to the values. And just like that, you have your table. I did it backwards again. Well, of course, I'm dyslexic, so that would be expected. There it is. That looks better. But what? That's less than 20 seconds. And so that's why pivot tables are not really hard. As long as you envision what you want and know where to drag them, it's pretty easy. Now let's do a few things here. First off, in 2007, they added a strange kind of layout. It says row labels and column labels. You know, if you're printing this report out, that's not very helpful. So we're going to go up to the pivot table tools. Context-sensitive ribbons. There's a bunch of stuff here. Let's go over to design. Very important. This report layout, tabular, will show the field names instead of that silly row label stuff. So now we see sales rep and region. Much better. You can do things like turn off and on and off rows and columns grand totals right there. So if you want to see just that, I kind of like them. So I'm going to keep that there. Whoops. On for rows and columns. In fact, why don't we go ahead and pick a style? You know, the problem is a lot of these styles, they're just not very good. I'm going to select that one. Columns. We didn't pick a style that did that. Let me pick a style. I scroll down. So there's the banded down here at the bottom right here. So if I see I have different colors, so I can come up here and say banded rows, banded columns. I don't like to do all the formatting stuff. I like to keep it simple. I'm going to click the more and scroll up, maybe this one. Oh, wait a second. What happened? The ribbons are gone. The field list is gone. Ah, when you click outside of the pivot table, it all goes away. All right. This is called cross tabulation. We have a variable here and a variable here. Cross tabulation is just because hey, here's a variable, and the intersection is the sum based on that whole sales column with criteria Northeast and criteria John. Let's just go back a second. Actually, let's name our sheet. Double click, and I'm going to call it PT1 or something like that. I'm going to go back over to this PT. What it does is the pivot table has to look through this column, and every time it sees West, and Sheila Dawn, it takes that number right there. And then it goes down, and when it sees West Sheila Dawn again, it adds. So it goes through this column, this column. Every time it sees West and Sheila Dawn, it knows to take that number. It keeps it in memory, and then it finally adds. So here's Sheila Dawn in the West. Cross tabulation. Now there's an interesting feature in a pivot table. Once you cross tabulate like this, this is probably in your end result. You then print it out and give it to your boss. But you can actually double click any one of these cells, and it will insert a new sheet with just the records that made up that particular number there. So I'm going to double click this one. And just like that, it puts a new sheet. And look at that, Northeast John. That is one of the most amazing features of a pivot table. Earlier, we saw filter for extracting data, right? But how about a pivot table? So then you would double click and name this like John Northeast. I'm going to come back over here. Let's see another amazing feature, the report filter. Now, earlier we saw how to filter, and it filtered the whole data set. Well, we can filter this entire data set here, this pivot table, using the filter area. So we could say customer and drag it to the report filter. And right up here, boom, it has a customer drop down. And we can say all. We can select multiple items. Maybe we only want to see Amazon and excelisfun.com. Then I'm going to click OK. And sure enough, it shows us. Now, this filter is not very polite up here. It just says multiple items. So there's actually something called a slicer. We come up here, and we can insert a slicer. Now, that's just a fancy word, slicer. That means filter the whole report here. So I'm going to go Insert Slicer. And I want one for customer. Click OK. Now, isn't that much better? You just put it right here, and you can uncheck everything, and they're all showing. You can click on one, click on another. Is that amazing? Are pivot tables the coolest thing ever? Click back in. Then you can format them. Again, the filters aren't whichever one you like. Now, how do I get two at the same time? Up here, it was easy. I'm going to click Amazon. You hold Control. Oh, check that out. That keyboard shortcut we learned all the way back in a Windows Explorer. We used it in Word, in PowerPoint, in Excel, all over the place. So Control to highlight ones not next to each other. If I click on Amazon, hold Shift and click right there, it highlights all of them in between. Okay, so that's filtering the whole report, either with the report filter here or our slicer right here. Let's look at a few other things. What about this number formatting? Probably not very good. By the way, we can close this field list, and it's out of the way. Anytime you want it back, you right-click, Show Field List. We would like to format these. Now, the problem is this is a pivot table. So if we pivot it, it goes into different cells. So if I highlight this and Control 1, forget it. That's not a good way to format a pivot table, because it only formats the actual cells. And if you pivot it in certain ways, the formatting goes away. So we don't use format cells when we get to a pivot table. We click in one cell somewhere, and we right-click, and it's Value Field Settings. Value because we're in the value area. Field because it's a field. We want to add a number formatting to the sales field. And settings because that's where like all the settings are. So I'm going to click that. Now there's a bunch of amazing things. You can actually change the name. So up here it says sum. But watch, if I type sales, right now that's the name of a field. It wouldn't let me do it. But watch this. I'm going to type a space. I'm going to like cheat, and now it'll let me call that sales. So we can change the field name. We can change the function, which we'll do in just a moment. But here's the number format. So I'm going to click the number format. And then I'm going to click on currency, for example. So this looks exactly like the format cells we use for cells. But because I'm going to click OK here, but because we click that, it's now applied to that field in the pivot table. Let's click OK. Much better. We should have done that a couple clicks ago. Now let's change the average. Where do we go? Well, we want to change the calculation. And I don't know where I can't remember where it is up in the ribbon. So I'm just going to right click. Value, because this is the value area. Field, because it's a field. Settings, because this is where you come to change everything. You can change average. There's 11 functions here. And then I click OK. So next thing we want to do is we would like to add multiple calculations. But I would like to do a new pivot table. I want to leave this one here. So I'm going to come back to this pivot table. This is where our data set is. And I'm going to add a new pivot table. Insert pivot table, or Alt-NVT. Alt-NVT, I'm going to say new worksheet, click OK. Now here, I just want region. I'm going to click region. I know it'll drop right there. And I'd really like to see the sum, the max, and the min, or the average. So 3 calculations here. I can do that with a pivot table quite quickly. And again, pivot table is much easier than trying to do this with a formula. All right, there's our sales field. But now let's think about it. I'm already using up one column here for summing. So if I want a max and a min, I have to then add the sales field some more times to the value area. Oh, look at that, sum of sales 2. And then a third time. You can do it. We want 3 calculations, so I'm going to do it 3 times. Now, how do I change this field? Well, first, let's right-click Sum, Value Field Settings, and then I'm going to change the number to currency. Click OK. Click OK. Now I want to change the function. I'm going to right-click this column, right-click, Value Field Settings, Average, Number, Currency, OK. OK. Just amazing. Right-click. Oh, I did. I did average. I meant to do max. No problem. Pivot tables can change it just with a flick of your right-clicking. I'm going to say max. And then here, right-click, Value Field Settings. And actually, I'd like to change it to min. And I want to change this up here. I don't want that, so I'm going to change the field name. We can leave min with no extra space because there's no field over here called min. We got the calculation, the field name, and the number formatting. I say currency. Click OK. Click OK. I'm going to come up here, and I can, whoops, I double-click that. If you can get your cursor into the cell. How about F2? You can actually just type right in the cell. F2 puts it into edit mode. I'm going to click here, F2, and then backspace. Whoops. Sales space. Min, max, sales. So we did multiple calculations all in the same pivot table. I want to go back over to this pivot table. Ooh, that's a bad sheet name. I'm going to type PT2. I'm going to come back over here, and I'm going to create a new pivot table. We're going to do 3 more pivot tables. So we're going to end up with pivot tables 1 to 5. So here I'm going to Alt-NVT, Enter. I would like to count the number of sales in each region. So I'm going to come over to, actually, region. Drag it down to here. And then counting. I could drag any one of these, but I'm going to drag region. The same in both the row labels and the values area. Now notice what happens. It's by default count, and the reason why is it interprets a text field as text, and it's programmed to just automatically count. Just like that, I'm going to go up to Design, Show Tabular. And then we can see the count. That's the count of number of cells in each region. I'm going to go back to the pivot table. One of the more amazing features is the pivot table's ability to group dates. So this data set has multiple years. We can show just the year's sales quite quickly using a grouping feature. Let's go ahead and create a pivot table on a new sheet. Alt-NVT, Enter. And I would like to drag the date to the row. Now, right now, if you have a data set with transactional data, and there's a lot of transactions each day, you can actually just drag the sales to the values, and boom, there is a daily sales report. But that's not what I'd like here. I see there's a bunch of 4s, and then there's a lot of data here, 5s, and I think there's some 6s. So I'd like to group. All I got to do is go to the field. There's actually grouping up in our ribbons up here, group selection. I like to right-click in a pivot table, right-click, group. No way. There it is. It found the earliest and latest date. And I'm just going to say it comes by default by months. You wouldn't want to do that because then it would group all the Januaries from all the years. But I'm going to say months and years. That way we can months and years, and then click OK. That is so hard to do with formulas. And yet, with pivot tables, you drop it, and then right-click, group, and you got it just like that. Now, I'm going to uncheck. Notice there's a new field for years. I'm going to uncheck date. Just like that. There's my sum by year. I'm going to right-click, value field settings, number, currency, OK. One last pivot table. That's probably the most amazing feature of pivot tables. I can just come back. All of a sudden, my boss says, what do you mean year? I wanted months by year. You just click it, and just like that, you got it summarized. All right, we'll leave it like that. Ooh, I have a sheet here. This needs to be named. I'm going to double click it. Pivot table 3. Double click. Pivot table 4. All right, 4 pivot tables, that's all we're going to do. But let's summarize what we have to do a pivot table. And always reminding that, always thinking that pivot tables are not hard. All right, you got to have your data set up correctly. And then you have to go to Insert, Pivot Table, click OK. You drag and drop. Remember to envision the row headers and the column headers. You drag number or whatever field you're calculating upon into the values. Oftentimes, this layout is not appropriate, so you go up to Design, Layout, and Tabular. You can format it if you'd like. Most of what we're going to do we could get from right-click, Value Field Settings. We can change the name. If it's the same name as a field name, then have a space. You can change the function. You should do your number formatting from here. And if you have dates, if we were to remove this, well, I'm not going to remove it. If we have dates here, you drag it and then right-click Group. And be sure if you're doing months to do months and years. All right, pivot tables, totally amazing. I guess we should name this Pivot Table 5. That was our kind of summary. You saw how quickly we could do something like that. We have some homework problems now. 9 with an answer, that's sorting. 10 with an answer, that's filtering. And 11 with an answer, that is a pivot table. We have a couple more topics for Excel. See you next video.